Okay, we've just seen what we mean by a theory, what a theory is, but what is a model? What's the difference between a model and a theory? Well, on the one hand, people use those terms quite interchangeably, so you may hear them used in different ways. But to be a bit more precise, a model is a way to represent a theory. A theory is an explanation of how the world works. It has a notion of causation. Uh, um, it identifies variables, but we need a way to represent the theory, and so a model does that for us. And there are two basic ways of representing a theory using a model. It can be a graphical model, uh, a diagram in a sense, or a mathematical model, an equation. And but in either case, the model has variables in it and relationships. And so what do we mean? What's a variable? A variable is something like crime that we just saw that varies, right? Crime moves up and down over years in any one city. It also varies across cities. So variables can take on different values or assume different attributes. They're things that vary. So crime varies, social disorder varies, a whole bunch of characteristics in the world vary, and that makes them a variable. And they are typically things that are measured, and then the measurements vary. And that's we've looked at that in a sense already. But the model, importantly, also includes relationships. How are the variables connected to other variables, and in particular, how might they be connected in a causal way? That is, that how change in one variable might produce a change in another variable. In particular, models have independent and dependent variables. Because we're, again, interested in cause and effect, what are the causes of important outcomes we see in the world, or do certain causes that we're interested in, such as policies, have certain effects in the world? So we're fundamentally interested in cause and effect relationships. Our models have at least one independent variable and one dependent variable. That's the most basic model in a sense. And the independent variable is the cause. You can think of the cause as being the independent variable and the effect being the dependent variable. So this little diagram here that you see with X and an arrow leading to Y is a very useful diagram. So start if you want to think about your own research, or about a study you're reading, or about some evidence you hear about. If you draw this simple diagram, X, arrow, Y, and then you think, okay, now what's the presumed cause in this scenario, or in this study, or in this program, and what's the presumed effect? Then the cause can be thought of as the independent variable, and the effect can be thought of as the dependent variable. So that's a good way to sort of straighten out your thinking about what is the independent variable, what is the dependent variable. The names come from the fact that the dependent variable depends on change or variation in the independent variable. So it's the effect of the independent variable. So it depends on the independent variable. Another way that the independent variable gets its name is that the independent variable is something that's manipulated. It's a policy or intervention or something that we change. So its variation is manipulated independently in order to observe its effect on the dependent variable. So that's how they get their names. But the terms are widely used in statistics and in research and in just thinking about evidence about how the world works. So implied in a model also is the notion of a causal mechanism. There must be a way in which X and Y are related. In other words, a process by which change in X leads to or produces change in Y. So the notion of a causal mechanism is a very important part of the process. So let's look at an example from the book, The Broken Windows Theory. As we mentioned already, disorder is the presumed cause, and crime is the presumed effect or outcome. So, one question: which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable? Well, if we assume that disorder is the cause of crime by allowing more disorder in a neighborhood, graffiti, public drinking, vandalism. If disorder is allowed to occur, then it triggers crime because people with more serious criminal intentions read those signals and commit more serious crimes. So if disorder is the cause and crime is the effect, then disorder is the independent variable and crime is the dependent variable. And another key question is what is the presumed causal mechanism? That's an important part of a theory, the causal mechanism. I just mentioned it. Disorder, small acts of disorder, vandalism, graffiti, littering, public drinking, those sorts of activities signal that the neighborhood's not being watched, that people are not reporting things or monitoring the streets, and larger crimes are then more possible. Basically, people who have the intention of committing larger crimes view the disorder as a signal that they can get away with the larger crime, and therefore that's the causal mechanism of the broken windows theory. Okay, so let's practice these ideas by taking two other variables. This is earnings and education. So I'm just going to pose these two questions and ask you to think about it first, and then I'll give my own explanation. So first, identify the independent and dependent variables. So which do you think is independent and which do you think is dependent? Which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable? That's question number one. And then what is the presumed causal mechanism? Right? So why are they causally related? So I'm just going to pause for a bit and let you think about that, the answers to those two questions. Okay, so let me let me show you the next one. Next slide. Okay, so it could be that you may have been thinking, well, earnings influence education, in the sense that maybe if you have more earnings, you can get an education. Certainly that's plausible, right? But I think I guess the relationship I was thinking about, I think that most people considering these two variables would think about, is that education, having an education, all of you are getting an education, so having an education, one of the causal effects that has is it increases your earning potential, right? So if you have a high school education as opposed to dropping out of high school, you are expected to earn more. If you have a college education as opposed to only a high school education, you're expected to earn more. If you have a graduate degree as opposed to just a four-year college degree, you're expected to earn more. So if we're thinking about it in that way, education is the cause. Earnings, lifetime earnings later in life, are an effect of how much education you've received. So education in that thinking about things, in that way of thinking about things, education is the independent variable. Earnings is the dependent variable. Okay. So now, what is the presumed causal mechanism? Why does that happen? Why does education lead to more earnings? Well, you may have thought of things like, well, if you have more education, you have more skills, right? And you have analytics skills, you have communication skills, and your skills are rewarded in the job market. If you have more education, more skills, that is rewarded in the job market through higher pay. It could be that education also provides you with connections, ideas, interactions with people that you can leverage, a kind of social capital that you can kind of leverage into career advancement and more earnings. So there are certainly several plausible mechanisms. A theory can have more than one mechanism, but at least it has to have at least some notion of the mechanism that connects the independent and dependent variable. So in education, it could be some combination of skills, social capital, um, even confidence and other things. Okay.